Honestly, these scenes with Marina felt like the type of scenes you see in the deleted scenes category on like a Blu-ray, and then after you watch them, you go, yeah, I get why that was on the cutting room floor. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a sequel video to my first video in my Bridgerton series where I'm covering every single season of Bridgerton in anticipation for the third season coming out this week. Just to catch you up, I'm looking at these seasons through fresh eyes. I did not watch any of these seasons when they first came out on Netflix. So these videos are sort of meant to be a refresher and just a conversation, a sort of book club type video. So going into season 2, I was really wondering how they were going to be able to pull off a season without Daphne and Simon. They were such an integral part of that first season. However, when I heard that Anthony was going to be a main focus, the main character of season 2, I got excited. I thought he was one of the most interesting side characters in season 1, and I think his actor is fantastic. Now, going into this season, I did not know about the Sharma family, and they are a great addition. I cannot stress this enough how great of an inclusion in season 2 the Sharma family actually was. Both sisters, both Kate and Edwina, are incredibly fascinating, well-realized, well-drawn characters, and they add so much dynamic and conflict to the original cast of Bridgerton. I have an issue with shows normally when they bring in new characters, new heroes, new villains just for a season and then shove them off at the end of each season. That's always been a pet peeve of mine when it comes to shows, this sort of like disposable nature of new characters, but it feels like the Sharmas to an extent are going to be an integral part of the show moving forward, and I'm really excited to see that. I think their inclusion brought up a really refreshing dynamic for the show, and the stark difference between Kate and Anthony and the different worlds they come from really provides a great amount of conflict and tension in their sort of like enemies to lovers romance that this season is exploring. On top of that, I actually thought a lot of the side characters this season were a lot more compelling. I found Colin as well as the Bridgerton boys a lot more interesting. I found the Queen a bit more interesting, and I really liked Eloise this season. In the first season, one of my main compliments was how kind of restrained it was to hold off on a lot of the spectacle and the erotic scenes for the first 4 to 5 episodes, and this season takes that and actually stretches it further. The kind of prolonged longing will they won't they between Kate and Anthony is dialed up to such an extreme in this season that it becomes like genuinely palpable. It genuinely feels like the writers are pushing the limits for how far you can take a will they won't they. Each time this sort of love story romance twisted in different directions, I genuinely thought it could have ended a variety of ways. Every single time their story took a different direction or a new turn, rather than feeling contrived or silly, I genuinely went with it. There were multiple points in this season where I thought Kate and Anthony as a couple would not eventuate. I thought Bridgerton season 2 was actually going to kind of subvert expectations and maybe hold Anthony accountable for some of his character flaws that are portrayed throughout season 1 and season 2. Kate is presented as a romantic interest for Anthony, but so is Edwina, and Kate feels like a foil to Anthony's worst traits. And as far as the way these sort of stories usually contrive conflict, I thought this season did it really well. I thought Kate overhearing the way Anthony talked about women obviously is going to set her on a path to make sure he does not pair off with Edwina. I also thought throughout the story the stark contrast and difference between Edwina and how she views love and Kate and how she views love was incredibly fascinating. And yes, you know that by the end of the story most people are going to get their fairy tale romance. That is the way these stories goes, but I think exploring these characters that start at different points and the conflict that brings up was really fascinating to watch. It's really interesting too. I talked in my first video regarding season 1 how negative the discourse was, but if you check Rotten Tomatoes, season 1 has the higher score, season 2 has the lower score, and I'm wondering if that's sort of a mismatch between younger audiences and older audiences, because it seems online, the general YouTuber take, the general Reddit opinion, it seems that everyone thinks season 2 is by far the strongest season. And on that topic, I will say season 2 feels like the more mature season. It feels like the more mature season. It feels like the more refined season. There are still things that we'll get into that feel a little juvenile and clunky, but for the most part, it feels like they took a lot of what worked in season 1, really tried to refine it and elevate it, and I think that's reflected in this kind of core romance and the kind of troubles and dramas that are presented that get in the way of it. I really enjoyed the fact that this main romance that you're invested in between Kate and Anthony is going to have to come at the expense of Edwina and her personal happiness. There is a serious level of emotional stakes in them pairing off. As an audience, you're sitting there rooting for Kate and Anthony, but simultaneously you're feeling awful for what Edwina is eventually going to have to realize. I feel like they pulled this tension off really well. I am so glad I missed when this show was originally coming out and nothing was spoiled for me, because yeah, I genuinely was like, either way someone is going to get seriously hurt. And there were points in this season where I thought he may actually just end up pairing off with Edwina, and him and Kate can never be. And that could have been a really powerful ending, but I do like how the story went overall. So let's go through some pros and some cons quickly, everything I enjoyed, everything I didn't enjoy, and then just some additional thoughts. So, pros. As I mentioned before, I love all the new characters. I love the new family. I think they were such a refreshing, exciting dynamic to be brought to the table. And only in season 2, it didn't take 3 or 4 seasons for them to start reaching out and adding new characters. A great, great addition in this show. 2, I thought the pacing and maturity of this season was genuinely mature and well-crafted and elevated. I love the way this season opens. It feels grand and powerful. It feels like it's building off the momentum that the first season created. Next, I thought they did fantastic work with Lady Featherington as a character in season 2. I think she was way funnier. I think she was a really well-realized, complex, mature character, and I loved her little beef that was going on with this like imposter guy that has come into their estate. An absolutely fantastic character that I think wasn't really present and as strong in season 1. Secondly, I gave it a massive compliment in the first season, but in season 2, I think the sex scenes were really well handled. In the first season, minus the Daphne and Simon ones, it often felt like they were kind of like shoehorned in just to keep people satisfied until that big Simon and Daphne payoff. In particular, I'm thinking of the way they used Anthony's sex scenes in season 1. It often felt like they were throwing it in there just to kind of like feed people scraps until the main event. Whereas this season, it really tested the audience's patience, in my opinion, in a really good way. You do get the scenes that a lot of people watch this show for, but they really make you wait for it, and they really make you focus on the non-physical chemistry. And I don't think either approach is wrong. I don't think what they did in season 1 is worse or better. I appreciate the difference in the way that these seasons explore this subject matter. Season 1 really is an exploration of like physical chemistry with Simon and Daphne, but in that first season they really struggle to emotionally connect and be mature with each other, whereas in this season it feels like Kate and Anthony take the opposite trajectory. It feels like they are completely at odds emotionally and need to learn to do that and connect emotionally and understand each other on that level before they connect physically, and I think it's just a really interesting contrast compared to season 1. It's interesting because this contrast actually happens again in Queen Charlotte with the way that show handles its sex scenes, but we'll get to that when I do my Queen Charlotte review. Next, another pro, I absolutely loved the scene where Eloise goes off at Penelope. I think it was just a really, really strong performance moment from a character that has previously been rather quiet and restrained to see her have this big, big moment against Penelope, and I feel like the actual tension there was really well built. And that's another pro of this season. I feel like the subtle sort of conflict that was brewing behind the scenes between Eloise and Whistledown / Penelope, this conflict that was coming up where Whistledown was creating serious problems for Eloise, and Eloise was confiding in Penelope without realizing that Penelope was actually Whistledown. For all my issues with Penelope's characterization so far, I thought this was actually like a really interesting conflict to explore. Also, while we're on the subject of Eloise, I thought her relationship was a really strong, interesting addition to this season. It did feel a bit slight. I do feel like I'm left wanting more and hope that it's further explored in season 3 or 4. However, for what we got, I think it added a lot of interesting conflict and substance to a character that previously felt like she was sidelined in season 1. On top of that, I really need to give credit to how the Bridgerton father's death was handled. They pulled off his death scene incredibly well. It felt genuinely tragic. I thought the spectacle of it, the mother running out on the giant estate, I thought it was really well done, and I loved that it was something so slight and coincidental that took him out. A really fascinating idea, a really effective sequence that actually informs the way we look at these characters moving forward. I feel like going back and watching season 1, knowing what Anthony went through and knowing why he has this sense of responsibility and trauma and why he's so guarded and closed off would really strengthen the first season. And I'm actually really impressed that the show withheld this information until season 2. They easily could have told us this in season 1, but it feels like really subtle, clever, restrained storytelling. On top of that, I did comment in the first season that I thought this show was surprisingly mature with its storytelling at times. They actually set up the bee as symbolism without ever telling us why it was there until the second season. The bee is a central part in those opening credits. On top of that, the first season actually closes with the bee kind of like flying off into the distance. Knowing there is such a dark story attached to that, it almost feels like either an omen or their dad's presence watching over them. Again, really effective storytelling, and I like that they don't reveal this to season 2. While we're talking about effective storytelling, there were a few visual moments in this second season that felt kind of mature. A specific moment with some ducks I really did appreciate. It's after this sequence where Anthony is begrudgingly kind of engaging in basically Regency era Tinder hookup culture, and he doesn't want to be paired off. He finds it a waste of time, and then he looks at two ducks happy as Larry together, and it like visually pisses him off. And this is right before he actually meets Kate. It's really good subtle storytelling. I appreciate it. They really don't need to do it. I know that the target demographic for this show is kind of like young adult, and they're probably not engaging with the show at this level, but I appreciate that it's there. On top of that, while we're talking about good metaphors and storytelling, I absolutely love the bee scene between Anthony and Kate, where basically he tries to save her from getting stung by a bee, and he has this really intense anxiety attack. It's really well done. There's so many emotions going on there. There's like sexual tension, there's fear, there's dread, there's panic, there's anxiety. It's scary and confronting and confusing, and I love how they both interpret this after that moment. Really fascinating, really well done. And I cannot believe I didn't talk about this earlier, but the montage that they give Anthony where he's going through his Regency era speed dating is absolutely fantastic. It's scored to this string version of this Nirvana song, and it's just such a great sequence, and not something I would have pictured being in Bridgerton. It's really exciting and fast paced, and it tells us so much about Anthony's character without really using a bunch of words.
Apologies, my lord. I much prefer a quadrille. I ride, I paint, I sing, I dance, I can divide and multiply, I even construct my own hats.
It's a really great example of the show don't tell rule. It gives us so much character work on Anthony in such a little amount of time. And as an introduction back into the world of Bridgerton in season 2, it really sets the season off on a powerful note. So next we're going to talk about cons. My main one is we don't see the wedding for Anthony and Kate. I don't know why this was done. Is it budget reasons? Is it because they couldn't be bothered getting the cast together? Like, why did they do this after all this insane tension, after all this will they, won't they, for literally like 7 out of 8 of the episodes? We don't get a wedding sequence. On top of that, we actually hear that they had like a honeymoon and went traveling for 6 months, and we get none of it. It's such a strange choice for a show that is meant to be romantic. It's meant to be an entry into the romance genre. So bizarre. Next, as much as I love the will they, won't they, and all the conflicts that were coming up in this season of Bridgerton, I do feel like they may have stretched it slightly too far just in the last episode or two. After the fake out wedding where Anthony and Kate accidentally ruined the wedding of Anthony and Edwina, I do feel like some of the conflicts go in circles. A lot of conversations we have literally had almost word for word happen again, and it does just feel like it could have been tightened up or handled in a slightly different way. Alright, next in the cons, we've got Penelope's character development, and what I mean by Penelope's character development is the total lack of character development. What is going on with Penelope? I did not like it in season 1 when she was revealed this early in the game to be Whistledown, because we knew nothing about her, but I was expecting going into season 2 to get a bunch of character work to make her more interesting. She is the least compelling character of this show so far. I have no clue what is going on, and I am really nervous for how they're going to pull this off in season 3. Now, I might swallow my words when season 3 comes out. I might be sitting there going, oh, they pulled it off, they crushed it, she's a great character, but I don't know what's going on. We know she's Whistledown at this point. There is no contrast between Penelope and Whistledown, which feels like a great thing they could be exploring with this sort of like secret identity subplot, but it just doesn't. There's no contrast, there's no tension, there's no personal stake. I wish there was something with Penelope that I was worried about getting exposed. If she had a bunch of interesting personal relationships that could crumble under the weight of Whistledown being revealed to be her. Now, admittedly, there is potential that in season 3, if she starts dating Colin and eventually gets out that she's Whistledown and she's the one that ratted on the pregnant woman in season 1 that he was interested in, that could be a great source of conflict, and I hope they go there. But as it stands, I don't know know what we're doing with Penelope specifically. Whistledown, sure, it's a pretty good concept that I think is further explored in season 2, but in terms of Penelope, we really need more. I don't know what is going on. While we're on the topic of the pregnant woman Marina, what on earth was her inclusion in season 2? I don't know what happened to this actress. Now, I have actually seen in the past 6 months that she apparently left the show due to kind of conflict that happened on set. So that might be the explanation as to what's going on. But the writing they gave her here in this season was incredibly flat. On top of that, I don't want to be too harsh, but the performance was strikingly off. She was really great in season 1, but in season 2, I don't know, these scenes really didn't work, and I was kind of waiting for them to be over. Honestly, these scenes with Marina felt like the type of scenes you see in the deleted scenes category on like a Blu-ray, and then after you watch them, you go, yeah, I get why that was on the cutting room floor. Next, as much as I appreciated the conflict that came out of the dowry subplot, I wish that was kind of like better handled between Edwina and Kate. I did kind of get on paper why Kate was hiding it. I know they gave us an in-world explanation, but I just feel like for the level of high-stakes conflict that came out at that dinner table, I wish we had more time with the Sheffields, as well as sort of how this dowry conflict really impacted these characters. Felt like it came into the show as quickly as it left, unfortunately. Now, again, I love the scene where Eloise absolutely went off at Penelope when she found out that Penelope was Whistledown. A fantastic performance. I just wish we knew more about Penelope, so when she started having her breakdown, I could kind of connect on both sides, because as it stands, she is such a clear example of a villain. Now, I also want to talk about an issue I had with Edwina. Again, I thought Edwina and Kate were great additions to the cast, to the show. There's one issue I had with Edwina. Basically, the whole show she's presented, swept up in the idea of love and kind of naive, and as a result, Kate and Anthony are able to get away with basically flirting with each other in front of her, basically having an affair in front of her without her ever noticing. Now, this is a central part of the show. Often people go, she's naive. How does she not realize what's going on? Characters talk about this explicitly. She's meant to be seen as having stars in her eyes, and yes, I do not mind that when she finds out she gets really angry and upset, but I feel like the way she portrays her anger and upset didn't really feel congruent with what we had seen in the earlier chunk of the season. The level of maturity and kind of like ability to express herself in a really refined manner, and this like striking, cold, elegant demeanor that she has in the last couple of episodes feels like a complete character shift. Again, I don't mind her being upset or angry at Kate and Anthony. I was expecting something a bit more bratty and dramatic and kind of like emotionally immature, the way we saw her in the earlier chunk of the season. But in the second chunk of the season, after the big revelation, she somehow seems like she has the maturity and grace of like a 50-year-old refined woman. It's really, really strange, really sharp twist out of nowhere, and it feels like at certain points we're watching a completely different character rather than watching a character that has slowly grown and changed and evolved over the course of the season. Anyways, thank you so much for watching my video on Bridgerton Season 2. I will be doing a video on Queen Charlotte in the next day or 2 or 3. If there's anything else you'd like me to talk about, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely day.